Hello and welcome. How compatible is Islam with the secular lifestyle of the West? Some conservative Muslim scholars argue that the two conflict, but our guest today has been campaigning for greater integration. Swiss-born Tariq Ramadan describes himself as a Muslim reformer and has called on Muslims in Europe and America to embrace Western culture rather than reject it. But for more than half a decade, he's been banned from visiting the United States because the Bush administration accused him of donating to Hamas-linked charities. After the current US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton personally intervened to lift the restriction, Tariq Ramadan was able to visit for the first time since 2004. Civil rights advocates are calling his return a triumph for freedom of speech. Opponents maintain that Ramadan is an extremist in sheep's clothing who secretly backs an Islamic revolution in Europe. His visit comes at a time of rising Islamophobia in Europe, with both Belgium and France proposing laws to ban face veils in public, and after last year's vote in Switzerland to forbid the building of minarets. So today we ask what can be done to improve the growing gap between Islam and liberal secular democracies. Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me now is Tariq Ramadan, Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at Oxford University and President of the European Muslim Network, a Brussels-based think tank. In his latest book, What I Believe, Dr. Ramadan seeks to clarify his beliefs, which have often been called controversial. I welcome you to the show.
Thank you for your invitation.
Well, first of all, I guess, welcome back to America. And what do you sense has changed in the 6 years since you were able to come?
Look, I first came 2 weeks ago, and then I was following, in fact, what was happening in the country because, you know, talking about Western Muslims is quite important. It's quite clear that before September 11, something was different in the whole, even within the Muslim communities, to tell you the truth, the discourse, the perception, and the vision. And now I think that after the Bush administration area is something which is, people are hoping for something which is new and a new understanding, new discourse. And this is the right time to be here. Why did
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton intervene to lift that ban on your travel to the US?
Because it was ridiculous from the starting point, you know. To be banned from the Bush administration was not, you know, a dishonor for me, because I was very critical of, you know, the policies in the Middle East and in Afghanistan and in Iraq. I was saying all these are mistakes. You are doing something which is completely wrong in the relationship with the Muslim majority countries, but also with Muslims. And then, you know, that I gave money before the Homeland Security blacklisted the organization was ridiculous. So we are just coming back to a more reasonable approach as for the relationship with Muslims and Muslim majority countries as well.
Now, it's interesting to note, of course, because you are outspoken, it's not just America that banned you. You've been banned in other countries. There are other places you can't travel.
Yes. The point is that this is just to prove that I have the same discourse wherever I go, because I was banned from the States, but I'm also till now, I'm banned from Egypt, from Syria, from Saudi Arabia. These are countries where I cannot go because I'm also critical and saying to the Muslims, stop blaming the others. We have to be critical, and these regimes are problematic.
How do you regard your controversial image, the fact people see you as controversial?
You know, I like the way the philosopher Charles Taylor, the Canadian philosopher, was describing what I'm trying to do. He said, Tariq Ramadan is not a controversial figure. He doesn't have an ambiguous speech. He has a clear stand between two ambiguous worlds. In the Muslim majority countries, this is just very difficult to be self-critical. And in the West, if we are not supporting, you know, the policies, it's as well your loyalty is questioned. My loyalty is not questioned. I am loyal to the future of our living together by being critical. There is no loyalty but critical loyalty. This is where I stand. So to be controversial now, to tell you the truth, Islam is controversial. So to be an outspoken Muslim is just to accept to be controversial.
I'm going to go on to some of those issues in just a second, but I have to ask you, because a lot of people traveling into the US worry about the experience at the US border. How were you treated when you came in?
The first time, they just took me 2 hours asking questions about what are you going to say and where are you going to speak. And I said, after entering, I say, I hope that the next time it will not be the same, that just come enter. And this is exactly what happened. 3 minutes just to go through the security measures and all these things. So I think that it's improving. It's good.
Now, when Barack Obama was elected president, of course, and that's been since you were out of the country, one of the first things he did was to reach out to people, especially the Muslim world. He could see the gap that had been created during the Bush administration's time. But you say that Barack Obama could do better in translating his speeches into action. Where has he failed on his promises?
I think that first we shouldn't be naive, you know, to change policies, to change visions, and also to enforce and to implement all this. It's quite difficult. So I'm not in a hurry, but still, the first speech he gave, targeting or towards the Muslim majority country, but not only towards the Americans, by saying, look, Islam is an American religion, and American citizens and Muslim American citizens are American and they are contributing. This is all fine. Now what we want is, we're all expecting something about Guantanamo. This is one thing. About Iraq, about Afghanistan, foreign policy, but not only. When it comes to what is happening with it, when it's still, we have people who are in jail with no reason. We have security measures. We have, still laws and decisions that are enforced in this country. This is not justice. It's still the Bush administration era. We want this to be just removed, lifted. So with me as a symbol, that's fine, but I'm not the only one. Lots of people, more anonymous, more ordinary Muslims, are facing today treatments that are not justifiable, and I think that this should change.
Now, one of the big discussions that have come up in recent years is the difference between Muslims in America and those in Europe, and there's been a lot of spotlight in Europe on Muslims now as well. What do you see as the biggest difference between American Muslims and European Muslims?
First, we should not essentialize. There are differences, but they are very common, challenges. So the first thing is just the great majority of the Muslims coming in Europe are coming from economic exile. Very modest background, not really knowledgeable about Islam. It was like a culture. So for them to remain a Muslim means to remain a Muslim as in the countries of origin. You had immigrants coming in the States who are much more knowledgeable, educated people, and they had a quick vision that, okay, we can take from the American culture, still remain Muslims, which was not easy for people with a modest background, not so much educated. So this is something which is quite important. But now, if you come to the social issues, and you compare this to African-American Muslims, because the Muslims in the States, it's not only about immigrants who have money and now they are living in the suburbs of the inner cities. What is going on in the inner cities? This is where you can compare. And you can say to the Europeans, stop Islamizing the socio-economic problems. It's a question of class. It's a question of class segregation. This could be compared to what the African-American Muslims are facing today.
A very interesting point, and I've heard you talk about this before, the Islamization of problems, that Europe is basically deferring its responsibilities and blaming Islam for the problems.
Yes, look what is happening. You were talking in your introduction about what is going on in Belgium and what is going on in France, talking about the burqa, 2,000 women, and they say this is a controversy, and then we go for someone who is just stopped in the street because she's driving with a burqa and say this is unlawful, and it becomes a national controversy. This is not the problem we are facing. We are facing discrimination on the job market. We are facing discrimination on housing. We are facing racism, and we are facing something which has to do with, everything which is, the European governments, they should reconcile themselves with true policy and politics, and not to just come to emotional politics and to follow in the footsteps of the populist parties. And in the Netherlands, in France, in Belgium, in Denmark, this is what we are facing. So I would say that this is something which is very worrying in the atmosphere that we have in Europe today.
You describe yourself as Muslim by religion and European by culture, and I wonder how you balance that being faithful to your religious practices, and then on the other hand having to deal with living in a Western culture and Western environment where often there seems to be conflict between the two.
Look, this is it. I started to write on this, and I wrote a book. This was 15 years ago, to be a European Muslim, trying to find where are the conflicts. And it's not true. The flexibility of the Islamic tradition with the latitude that we have in the European or the Western legal system, we can find our way, and we are fine. In fact, if we rely on facts and figures, millions of Muslims are American Muslims, European Muslims, and they abide by the law. And what I'm saying, we need the 3 L's. And this is what I'm advocating in the last book, what I believe. The first one is to abide by the law. And we abide by the law. To know the language of the country. We speak English, you and me now, and we speak English as Americans, or we speak the European languages. And the third is loyalty to our country. But loyalty, as I said, we should not have to prove our loyalty to the country. If I'm critical towards the American policy, or the foreign policy, or the British foreign policy, or the French foreign, it's not because I'm not a citizen. This is the way I just show to the people that I'm truly loyal to my country, because I'm supporting the good, I'm resisting to what I think is bad.
So the conflict we're talking about is not such religious or moral, it's a political conflict.
It's political, and what we are expecting from the government is just apply the law equally and not use the ideological perception of the law